As the toxicology report came in, the investigators' worst fears were confirmed. Richard had been poisoned with a rare, fast-acting toxin. It was undetectable by normal means, making it the perfect weapon for someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The poison had likely been introduced into the meal, and within an hour of ingestion, it had caused Richard's body to go into shock. At this point, the investigators knew that Richard's death was no accident, it had been murder. But who was responsible? On a cool, crisp evening in late October, the Maxwell family gathered around their dinner table for what seemed to be a typical family gathering. This was the kind of evening that would go down in history as an ordinary, even pleasant event, the kind people look back on with a sense of warmth and nostalgia, until the tragedy struck. The Maxwell family had always been close-knit. Each year, they would celebrate holidays, birthdays, and simple family milestones with meals and laughter. However, October 26, 2022, was to be different. What started as a quiet dinner between family members would soon spiral into a nightmare that would leave an entire community reeling. Richard Maxwell, the patriarch of the family, had just returned from a business trip. His wife, Karen, had been preparing a roast dinner all day. Their 2 children, Emily and Ryan, had been busy with school and work, but both made time to come home for the evening. Their small suburban house in Brighton, a town known for its tight-knit community and tree-lined streets, was the perfect backdrop for what was about to unfold. The dinner table, adorned with fine china, glistened under the warm, golden light of the overhead chandelier. The smell of roasted meat and vegetables filled the air as the family took their seats. Richard, a 48-year-old successful real estate broker, was in good spirits. His wife, Karen, 45, was beaming with pride as she served the meal. Emily, their 22-year-old daughter, was eager to talk about her recent college achievements, while Ryan, 19, was quieter, focused on the food in front of him. As they ate, there was no indication that anything was amiss. But by the end of the evening, the scene would be unrecognizable. It would be a scene that detectives and the town of Brighton would remember for years to come. The first hint that something was wrong came just after dinner. Richard, always the life of the party, had begun to feel unwell. At first, he chalked it up to exhaustion from his trip and the rich food. However, as the evening progressed, his condition worsened. He grew pale, his breathing shallow, and he seemed increasingly disoriented. Karen, always the caregiver, brushed it off as nothing serious. She suggested that he go upstairs to rest, but Richard stubbornly refused. "I'm fine, Karen," he insisted. "Just need a little time to shake it off." Ryan, who had been quiet all evening, suddenly stood up. "Maybe we should call a doctor," he suggested, his voice unusually calm. Richard waved him off. "It's nothing, son. I'll be fine." But as the evening wore on, the situation took an even darker turn. Richard stumbled to the kitchen, swaying slightly as he tried to pour himself a glass of water. He collapsed to the floor, groaning in pain. Panic set in. Karen rushed to his side, trying to help him up, but his body was limp, and his face was now twisted in an expression of sheer agony. Emily, who had been texting on her phone, looked up in shock. "Mom! Dad!" she screamed, rushing over to help. Karen, already in a panic, frantically dialed 911. "Please. My husband, he's not breathing. I don't know what's happening." As the emergency operator instructed Karen on what to do, Emily noticed something chilling. Ryan, standing in the doorway, was staring at his father with an almost emotionless gaze. His expression was unreadable, detached. Emily couldn't put her finger on it, but something about the way he was standing made her uneasy. By the time the paramedics arrived, it was too late. Richard Maxwell was pronounced dead at the scene. The paramedics worked tirelessly to try to revive him, but it was clear that whatever had caused his collapse had been swift and fatal. His body showed signs of acute distress, sweating, convulsing, and eventually going into cardiac arrest. Detectives from the Brighton Police Department arrived shortly afterward. Sergeant Laura Mitchell, a seasoned investigator known for her keen instincts, was called in to lead the case. At first glance, there appeared to be no sign of foul play. The house was neat, no valuables were missing, and there were no obvious injuries to Richard's body. However, something was off. Richard's sudden and extreme reaction to the food he had just consumed raised immediate suspicion. It was not uncommon for people to experience food allergies or food poisoning, but Richard's reaction was unusually severe, and the timeline was troubling. He had been perfectly fine earlier in the evening. The first order of business for the police was to examine the meal. Karen, still in a state of shock, was unable to provide any meaningful answers. She had prepared the food herself, as she had done many times before. There were no indications that the meat had been tampered with, nor did anyone else see ill. However, as the investigators took samples of the food to the lab, a chilling theory began to form. Could this have been intentional? Was someone trying to harm Richard? The family was questioned one by one. Karen, Emily, and Ryan were all interviewed separately by Sergeant Mitchell. It was during these interviews that some unsettling details began to surface. Karen was a mess, barely able to hold it together. She recounted every detail of the evening with trembling hands, but nothing seemed out of place, until she mentioned something curious. Ryan, he was acting strangely. He was so quiet during dinner. And then, when Richard collapsed, he didn't seem to care. He just stood there, staring. Emily, on the other hand, was visibly upset, but she was adamant that there was nothing strange about Ryan's behavior. He's always been a little quiet, she explained. Maybe he was just tired. I don't know. But my dad, he was fine 1 minute, then gone the next. It wasn't much to go on, but the investigators were beginning to suspect that there might be more to this than a simple food-related incident. They decided to conduct a full toxicology report on Richard's body. The results came back within a few days, and the truth was even more disturbing than anyone had imagined. Richard had been poisoned. As the toxicology report came in, the investigators' worst fears were confirmed. Richard had been poisoned with a rare, fast-acting toxin. It was undetectable by normal means, making it the perfect weapon for someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The poison had likely been introduced into the meal, and within an hour of ingestion, it had caused Richard's body to go into shock. At this point, the investigators knew that Richard's death was no accident, it had been murder. But who was responsible? The investigators honed in on the family members. The fact that Karen and Emily were so upset seemed genuine, but Ryan's behavior was harder to explain. Was he a bystander? Or was he the one who had poisoned his father? Detective Mitchell requested a deeper look into Ryan's recent activities. The more they dug, the more disturbing details emerged. Ryan had been struggling in school, had fallen into a deep depression, and had started seeing a therapist. But the most shocking revelation was his financial troubles. He had been heavily in debt and had recently been caught in a web of gambling. Further investigation into his bank records revealed a series of large withdrawals over the past few months, all linked to a secret online gambling account. It appeared Ryan was desperate for money, and willing to do anything to get it. As the investigation progressed, a shocking family secret came to light. Emily, Ryan's older sister, had uncovered evidence that pointed to a deeper motive for the crime. Ryan had been involved in a series of fraudulent activities, including identity theft and manipulating his parents' bank accounts. It seemed that Richard and Karen had been unaware of the extent of their son's troubles, but Emily had discovered some of his actions and confronted him just a few weeks before the dinner. Ryan had promised to change, but it appeared his desperation had only grown. He had been planning to kill his father to collect a life insurance payout that would solve all his financial problems. The evening of the family dinner had been the culmination of Ryan's plan. Using his knowledge of food preparation and his access to the family's kitchen, he had slipped the poison into the roast. The effects were quick and devastating, but Richard's sudden collapse had thrown Ryan off. In the chaos, he had frozen, unsure of what to do next. That was why, as Emily had noticed, Ryan had been eerily calm during the emergency. After weeks of mounting evidence and testimony, Ryan Maxwell was arrested on charges of first-degree murder. The community of Brighton was left in shock. How could someone so close, someone so trusted, be capable of such a brutal act? The trial that followed was grueling, with Ryan's defense team attempting to argue that he had acted out of desperation and mental illness. But the overwhelming evidence of his motive and actions led to his conviction. Ryan Maxwell was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The town of Brighton, forever changed by the tragedy, would never forget the family dinner that had ended. Epilogue: The aftermath. The Maxwell family home was sold after the trial, and Karen and Emily moved to a different state to start over. The pain of the loss was unbearable, but they tried to rebuild their lives in the wake of Ryan's betrayal. Emily, who had once believed in the sanctity of family, now struggled with a deep sense of loss, not just for her father, but for the trust that had been shattered in the most unimaginable way. In the quiet town of Brighton, the story of the Maxwell family would forever haunt the residents, a reminder that sometimes the greatest dangers lie not outside the home, but within it.